The biography of Christopher Nemelka begins in 1987 when he was 25 years old and he was employed as a security officer for the LDS Church. He had two children named Brittany and Joshua from his first wife named Paula Blade, and he was recently married to his second wife named Jackie Stoll. During your second marriage, you worked as a security officer with the LDS Church of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Will you please share your experience working for the church and the circumstances which led up to your experience in the upper room of the Salt Lake Temple? Please share exactly what took place in that room.
See, now that's a wide spectrum of things. Okay, you want to start what you said you want to start in 1987, but there was a whole bunch of things that happened before then. But and you'll get to those, I'm sure, sometime. I had served a mission. The fact is, what led me to become a security officer for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was my intense fanaticism of being a Mormon, an LDS priesthood holder. I didn't want to. I dropped out of the University of Utah. I was going to become a lawyer, and I was working as a collector. I was doing everything I could to just be a normal Mormon guy. You go on, you go to college, you become successful, do those type of things. But in my fanatical state of wanting to comply with the temple endowments that I had made, and that is this: the greatest temple endowment, the greatest commitment that a Mormon person makes inside the temple, they don't talk about, is one where they dedicate everything that they have, everything that they are, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That told me that I should concentrate primarily on that church, as being my life is all about that church. That's what made me go and apply to be a security officer. But the whole way that took place is very interesting, and you want to call it guided, fine. You want to call it a coincidence, whatever. But as I went up to the Human Resource Department in the LDS Church, back in, I can't remember exactly the day, the time I was hired. It was sometime, I think, in 85. No, let's see. Probably more like 84 sometimes. I don't know exactly, but 84. Let's see, Brittany was born, Joshua was born while I was so it was probably in 84 when I first went to work for the church. I went up to the Human Resource Department and said, I want to apply for a security officer's position. And the lady said, well, fill out this application. So I sat down and filled it out, and I gave it back to her. She said, well, there's no openings in the security department. She took my application and said that to me. There's no openings in the security department. We'll go ahead and put this in a file. If anything comes up, we'll let you know. She looked down and said, Nemelka, you're a Nemelka? I said, yeah. She goes, would you have some relative that played basketball for Brigham Young? Some star? I said, yeah, that was my uncle, Dick Nemelka, played in the 70s. She goes, oh. She goes, you know what? Hold on just a minute. She got up out of her desk. I'm waiting out. I was ready to go. I just said, okay. She went in, talked to somebody. I can't remember what his name was. Eventually a guy, the head of the Human Resources, came out with my application. He says, oh, well, Brother Nemelka, nice to meet you. My name is, it's right at the tip of my tongue. Anyway, he said, look, all the security positions have been filled, but why don't you hold on a minute? Here's what happened, guys. It's incredible. They had already decided on a security officer, but there was a series of 3 separate interviews that one must go through in order to become a security officer. They had already decided on this one. This guy, this head of the Human Resources, somehow got a hold of the heads of the security and says, I got somebody for you. You've got to interview this guy before you make that final decision. So he took me up in the downtown in the high-rise where all the administration buildings are, basically the corporation part of the church. There's a floor that nobody can get to. It was the 26th floor at the time. So he put me in this special elevator that same day, took me up, and sat me down by this other guy. Little did I know the guy that he sat me down by was the guy that they were going to hire. Okay, but they somehow, I don't know what went on behind the scenes, I'm not going to pretend to know, but eventually one of the security heads came out and said, Brother Mel, come on in here. So I went in there and had that interview. They, during that first interview, decided to keep me and let the other guy go. I felt terrible, but that's what happened. Then in a series of I had to come back for another couple interviews, and I talked to these guys, and I told them obviously the truth. I was dedicated to commit to that temple, that temple challenge, commitment that we all make, that you dedicate your life and everything that you have to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what I was doing. I became a security officer. Oh, to the chagrin of the LDS security department. So basically, as a security officer, you can get in you're behind the scenes in everything. We cross-trained in all areas of the church at that time. At that time, there wasn't a Joseph Smith Memorial Building. It was the Hotel Utah. And the main street had gone all the way through. Things were different back in '84. But as I started in my security profession, I was to the T. I was a fanatical Mormon. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I had the priesthood of God, as I believed. I lived by the scriptures. I lived by the words of the general authorities. I would actually I went through the whole standard works. That's the Bible, which is the Old and New Testament, the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, and I read every single verse. And if it was a commandment from God as I perceived it, I'd put a C by it. Went through the whole thing. I had the whole thing marked as the whole thing. Because I wanted to obey the commandments of God. That's what I wanted to do. Okay? And I had my wife, I was married to Paula Blades. Paula and I married on October 31st, 1982. I think that's when we were married. It's a long time ago. But she was a young girl, but that's not the part you're asking about. You're asking about the part from 1987 on. But all that stuff is important. And basically she had left me. I had custody of my kids. And not in 87. I'm sorry. Yeah, it was before that. 1987, I'd been divorced from her. But I'm talking about the time I got hired as security officer. I was married to Paula. You see why these things have to be done chronologically, so you get to that. So I'm going to lead you there. Paula and I were married. She was a young girl. She was the head cheerleader her senior year in Columbia Falls, Montana. And she left all that to marry me. And that's another story that we'll get into when you want to. Anyway, you can imagine a girl who's like that from a small town of Montana all of a sudden now is in the house having kids with a fanatical LDS priesthood holder. I would come home from work and I would touch the TV to see if she had been watching soap operas, which she loved to watch. And I said, Paula, you cannot watch soap operas. Here it is. And I got out the ensign, I got out the Church of General Authority's words and said, look, I had marked it with a C. They tell us not to watch the soap operas. So you can imagine Paula. Well, we know how that ended. The point is, I was a very, very, you call it a fanatical? No, I was true to my religion. I wasn't a hypocrite. I lived that religion, and I abided by those sacred covenants that I felt that I had made the temple. It's that simple. So that led me up to becoming a security officer and dedicating my life. Well, trying to make a long story short, we don't need to go into all the details. It wasn't too soon didn't take very many months working behind the scenes where I could start to see the great hypocrisy of the general authorities of that church. They portray themselves in one way to the public when behind the scenes they're pretty much businessmen. But that didn't dissuade me. I just figured, like everybody else does in the LDS church, they're just men. Church is true, but the men are imperfect. And I went with that. So I supported them in every way, shape, and form. It wasn't until 1985, I can't remember the exact date, but we can look this up. The date that Mark Hoffman did his bombing incident. Okay, we had heard about a couple people being killed. They didn't know who it was. I was sitting we can find the exact date that this occurred, that I was sitting in my post at the genealogical library in Salt Lake City as a security officer when I heard this explosion that rattled the genealogy library. And it came over at the old Deseret Gym that was downtown. There was a Deseret Gym there. And that's where Hoffman had tripped the bomb, blew himself up basically. Didn't kill him. And that's when all that started happening. The church got involved, and I saw the way that the LDS Church put off the FBI. I was a security officer. I was supposed to keep people off. They would come with subpoenas. They'd come to talk to people. And then I heard Gordon B. Hinckley in a news conference lie, who he said, I've never had anything to do with Mark Hoffman. That was bullshit, because we know security that Mark Hoffman had visited him, Spencer Kimball, and other people on various occasions. We knew that from our records. You don't go get to see those guys unless you go through security. I knew he lied. That was the first time in my life that I began to doubt that these guys were representatives of Jesus Christ. How could he lie like that? But then my mind, I kept going back and forth to, well, they're just men, and maybe he's lying to protect the church. Because I didn't know people lied about these things. I had no idea. I didn't know that Joseph Smith had lied about many things. I didn't know those things. I thought everything was supposed to be honest and upfront. So that was my first indication that things weren't honest and upfront. That the LDS Church and their public service department, the people that speak for them, they're not honest. They are politically correct. But I didn't understand that, and that was my first time that I realized that they lie to protect the church. And that's what got my mind going. And then I started my investigation. Then I started looking into everything. I got into personal files of all the apostles, into their personal lockers, did things that if they had known at the time, I'd have been fired on the spot. As security officer on my nighttime rounds, I did that. I wanted to know the truth. And for quite a few months, a couple years, it floored me what I was discovering. What I was discovering about the LDS Church and what goes on behind the scenes. These are not bad people. There's no conspiracy going on there. They're simply people that are not inspired in any way by God, unless you believe in the Mormon God. But they're certainly just businessmen that are doing the best they can. And they're not bad people. None of the general authorities are. But that didn't matter. In my mind, they were God's and Christ's representatives. That got this fanatical Mormon kid thinking and doubting. That's what happened. The doubt started to come in. I couldn't reconcile the things that I was seeing with my own eyes as a security officer with what I believed as a staunch member of the church, that these guys were God's representatives on earth, that they were the creme de la creme of men, and they were the apostles of the Lord Jesus Christ. That led me to the investigation. That led me ultimately to that night. Okay, and of course, Jackie and I found a wife. I was a single dad. Paula had given me the kids. We can go into that later. I had full custody of the kids, and I married Jackie Stoll in April of 1987. And I think it was April 7th, 1987. I think our son Brandon Mark was born in April the next year, 1988. But at that point, we got married in Temple. Jackie, in her mind, married a true blue Mormon guy who knew the scriptures better than anybody she'd ever known, who wanted to live the gospel according to the Mormons, wanted to live the church way, the church gospel. And she married me, and then she didn't know anything about what I was discovering as a security officer. I didn't talk to her about those things. And I can't really tell anybody what she felt at the time. Someone has to get that from Jackie. All I can say is that it was on June 15th of 1987 that I was assigned to cross-train in the Salt Lake Temple. And I was generally assigned to the genealogical library and the church museum in that quadrant of the LDS Church downtown Salt Lake City. But they had us cross-training so that we could fill in for people. And at that point, I believe it was a Tuesday. I'm not quite sure on the day. But I was cross-training. And then I just began to see things. For example, the Holy of Holies. I saw the engineer that was let in there to vacuum the floor in the Holy of Holies, which for what Mormons believe is the most holiest place in the temple. Only the prophet gets to go in there. This guy was in there with a vacuum with headphones on. And I'm just, oh well. But something came over me in that temple. And that took me to the upper floors of that temple where at that time, and I don't know if they've changed this or not, there was a place that only the 12 apostles could meet. And inside that room, it was an opulent room. There were 12 high-back chairs, and around the room there was a portrait, about a 3 by 4 foot portrait of each of the apostles. And then there was a table in the middle of the chairs, and they had the scriptures on there. And I walked in there, and my heart just sank because of the opulence, because of these guys. They only meet in here, and they're seeing their own portraits. It made me sick. My heart was sick, and I was crying inside. My heart was beating. I was just in turmoil. At that point, my mind, something happened to my mind where I just did not believe that there was a God. I didn't believe, I thought everything was distorted. There couldn't be any truth. But the only source that I felt that I had been trained up since I was a youth to call upon for understanding to help me out in this dire situation that I was in was God. That now I didn't even know existed. And I just fell to my knees by that table where those scriptures were. And just cried. I don't even know if there's a God. I don't know what's going on. I just don't know. Now here's where it gets weird. And here's where the world has to decide what really happened. Because even myself, no, I can't. But someone might be able to think that the guy went crazy at that moment. At that moment, psychologically, Christopher Nemelka lost his mind. And then his mind began to be schizophrenic, and he created a whole other reality that wasn't real. That's a possibility, and anyone can come up with that. Okay, they can, because the things that I'm going to tell you that happened, that I know happened. But how they happened, why they happened, I can explain how they happened, why they happened, and from my perspective. But someone watching this, a psychologist or somebody who doesn't believe in the marvelous working of wonder, they can correctly assume that I lost my mind. And that's why they would say he's so convincing, and he is telling the truth, according to his perspective. Crazy people tell the truth, but it's not the reality for the rest of us. So I've given these synopsis or the reasons why what I'm about ready to explain occurred. I either lost my mind, or the LDS Mormon Church is God's only true church, and Lucifer himself appeared to me, basically made me Lucifer's messenger. Because the marvelous working of wonder takes people away. It's the most powerful work that exists that can take people away from the Mormon faith. So that's a possibility. You got to give it that. That was a possibility. Or I started scheming within my mind somehow, and because I'm a smart guy, to create all this. I don't know. People have to come up, or it's true. Or everything I'm saying, I'm about to tell you is true. And when I explain what happened, and if a person would open their mind and let me explain why it happened, then they might be convinced, oh my hell, this makes sense. This would make sense that this happened to this man at this time. Because the first thing that happened was with my free will, I opened my mind to the possibility that all my fanaticism and everything that I ever believed about the Mormon Church was not true. And if a person has that doubt and opens their mind, they are psychologically ready for new information to come in. I wasn't studying anti-Mormon literature. I wasn't studying anything like that. So it was at that moment, though, that my mind was opened up to that possibility. I could have walked out of that room and started studying anti-Mormon stuff. But that's not what happened. What happened was this. As I was knelt down crying on that table, I had this incredible feeling of loneliness, and one might describe it as a darkness, as an incredible power that overcomes you and almost weighs you down. kind of forcing me down. But all of a sudden that room just lightened up. It wasn't really a gradual light, but it was a brilliant light, unlike any artificial light can create. Was it like the sun? No, it wasn't. It was just an incredible thing that lightened all my emotions. Whether I went crazy or whatever happened, that's what I felt. Then all of a sudden, two personages basically appeared. One I recognized as my grandfather, Joseph, Nephi, and Amelka, who stood off and he looked like my grandpa, dressed in white, a white robe-like thing. It wasn't temple clothes, because temple clothes you have a tie and a white shirt, but he could have been a temple worker dressed in a white garment. That was my grandpa. Never said anything, just smiled. And then there was a personage that I thought, in my mind, was Joseph Smith. Had the images that had been portrayed to me that I had seen. This individual who was dressed in white, had white hair, but was young, and a white beard, but looked young. A brilliant type of white. He was there. You see, he was there, and I thought, okay, man, wow, what's going on here? My grandpa basically didn't say anything, didn't do anything. At this point, I'm confused. I'm not really quite sure what's going on. Joseph's first words were basically my name, be at peace. Christopher, be at peace. That calmed me to an extent, but then he started to explain the reasons why he was there. He started to talk about the church and what it was really, that it was corrupt, that it wasn't true, that it had fallen terribly away from the true gospel of Jesus Christ. And then he introduced why he was there with me, that I was going to be the translator of the sealed part of the Book of Mormon, of the gold plates. And it was that moment that all this rush of Lucifer can deceive you came back to me. Lucifer can deceive you. And at that moment, now let me go back to my grandpa and what that purpose was for. The moment I saw my grandpa, it made me feel real comfortable. Very, very comfortable. And he's there. Obviously something special is going to happen because my grandpa's supporting this. Never said a word, just smiled. And this Joseph character started telling me these things, and then the doubts came, and then this evil feeling, this fear came over me that people get, like if you watch an evil movie or whatever, and it just overcame me, almost. Well, this quote-unquote Joseph Smith character reached his hand towards me and touched my temple, just touched my head. I drew back, but he was able to touch me. The whole scene changed immediately. No longer was there this Joseph Smith character standing in front of me. My grandpa's disappeared. And my mind was enlightened like I can't even explain. A light turned on. And I knew things that I'd never, ever even contemplated before. I understood things. In front of me was an advanced human being. An advanced human being who wasn't Joseph Smith at all. It was a completely different looking person. The same soft beard, same white hair, but it wasn't Joseph Smith. Okay, it was and then I realized, I just knew at that time that this advanced human being had once lived as this Joseph Smith guy in one of his incarnates. But my perspective had completely changed. What had happened at that time, for those who don't know, is that basically they gave me a mortal lobotomy. And with the technology that they had, changed my mind and my brain so that my brain became interconnected with my true advanced self. In essence, we're all advanced human beings going through a mortal experience. That's all it is. We're basically playing a mortal game. And we don't know that. People aren't connected. We feel it. That's why people come up with this spiritual essence that they feel. That's why they feel like God's there, someone's there. Nobody's there but themselves. But instantly I realized all these things. And then I realized what was going on. And then this Joseph Smith, I mean, he wasn't Joseph Smith at that time. This person began to have conversations with me. And it was all, my whole countenance lightened up. I understood. I understood reality. I understood the joke, how we're getting punked down here in this world. I understood the true nature of God. The only God that exists is the advanced human that we all are. That our mortal brains are connected on a scientific level to these advanced human brains that we have. And all this experience that we're having is going on inside the advanced human brain. So instantaneously, I had a full perception of reality, the real truth of what's really going on. It was amazing. So we had conversations for probably, I don't even know how long, maybe an hour, but warnings were given. That's when he showed me the plates. That's when the plates appeared there. That's when I understood that this is a prop. And I knew where the Book of Mormon had come from. I knew it didn't come from these gold plates. But I also, as I contemplated me taking these so-called plates and having the bands disappeared, and all of a sudden they were the whole plates. And it's my job to translate. I knew it wasn't translating anything because I knew that they were a prop. I knew that they were useless. That what was written on them, the characters were nothing more than a motivation piece to get Joseph at that time and me to do something out of our character that would extraordinary. So the question is going to be asked, so where did the Book of Mormon come from? And where did the sealed portion come from? Well, the answer, the true answer, whether people can accept it or not, is that Joseph Smith didn't write the Book of Mormon. That was written by Oliver Cowdery and Martin Harris. Martin Harris at first, his wife wrote some of it. Those were lost, of course, in the 116-page lost manuscript. Oliver Cowdery wrote the Book of Mormon. But how? Because if we had the actual transcript of where the book, obviously somebody wrote words down. It was taken to a printer who put the type in. Who wrote those words? Oliver Cowdery did. But where did he get them? Joseph Smith told him what to write. Now in my case, I actually wrote the words on a computer. Where did I get them? Joseph claims that he got them through Urim and Thummim, through these two rocks, when placed together, becomes kind of like a cell phone, where you get text messages. And that's how it was done. That's in reality where the Book of Mormon came from, the sealed portion. That's exactly what happened, because I knew that advanced human beings were responsible for not only the Book of Mormon, but for what I was going to do. And how they have to deal with mortals. It's tough to deal with mortals. It's tough to keep us motivated. But those plates were real. Now my enemies and some critics will say, oh, well, he's insane. He was insane at that time, so anything could have been real. And that's fine and dandy. But what was produced? If Joseph Smith made that up, man, he made up an incredible book. Those critics out there who've never studied the Book of Mormon and don't understand why people like Mitt Romney, Orrin Hatch, Harry Reid, and some of these so-called powerful men in society believe in that book, is because they haven't read it and they don't understand what it is. And those who demean the sealed portion do the same thing. They haven't read it. And they don't know what it is. You can't ask Mormons. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and their 80,000 missionaries, they don't have a clue what the Book of Mormon's about. Most of them have no idea. They believe that the gospel is their church. They have defined the gospel of Jesus Christ as going to church, obeying the word of wisdom, obeying your leaders, paying your tithing, doing your temple ordinances. And they have an article of faith. We believe that first principles and ordinances of the gospel are first, faith in the Lord Jesus Christ, second, repentance, third, baptism by immersion for remission of sins, fourth, you know what it is. That's their gospel. No, it's not. It's not. Joseph Smith, when he first got the idea of the Book of Mormon, and as it began to be presented to him the way that it was, he realized that all the Book of Mormon was to present to the world a counter to the Bible, to demonstrate through Scripture, new Scripture, what the fullness of the everlasting gospel was. It was the words, according to the Book of Mormon, in the story of Jesus coming down to the Native Americans and giving them the fullness of the gospel, which was simply a guide to how to treat each other properly. That's it. And the LDS Church, the Mormon Church, in Joseph's time and this time, they don't have a clue what the gospel is. They don't concentrate solely on those things. Anyway, so we're in the temple. All this is happening. There's a lot of details there, but the fact is, I knew what was real. I knew that people had been punked, that they don't know what's going on, that I knew that the God and religion that people believed in is simply not true. None of it. And then all of a sudden I had to leave and go back home. I entered a whole new world that was a complete game to me. Nothing was real. But I was given strict mandates not to talk about what happened to anybody, not even with my wife, Jackie, at the time. That things would be prepared. I'd meet people that would help me. And you can imagine how I felt. Now I had to go out and face a world that I knew people were insane, basically. I, in my own mind, was the only person upon earth that wasn't insane. Everybody else didn't have a clue who they were being misled by religion, by gods invented by men, by commandments invented by men to control people, but I was free from all that. Now, what happened after that, that's what we get into. That's where we ask the details, and then you'll understand why I did what I did. Exactly how I started using the knowledge that I had to really help people. I've never wanted to hurt anyone in my entire life. I've never wanted to do that. But I did in some ways. I hurt them emotionally. Not physically, I'd never hurt a flea that way, but emotionally there were people hurt. Why? You'll have to ask them. So, I just answered your question of what happened at the temple and what led up to that with a lot of stuff. Go ahead.